Hello YouTube and welcome back. This is Nico and you're watching Dare to Game. Today we are doing something a little different for TV Tuesdays. We are not recapping a show or even looking at the best characters from a show or anything like that. Today we are comparing two legendary medals from two separate franchises. Today we are asking the question, which is stronger? Valyrian Steel from Game of Thrones or Elven forged steel from Lord of the Rings? For simplicity's sake, I will just be referencing one weapon from each. So we will be comparing Longclaw from Game of Thrones to Anduril from Lord of the Rings. Keep in mind, I will be referencing many sources from the books and movies for Lord of the Rings, and also several sources in the books and movies for Game of Thrones. So, let's dive on in. Just as a little aside, I am far more knowledgeable about Lord of the Rings and Tolkien's Legendarium than I am with Game of Thrones. That being said, I have seen seasons 1 through 7 in their entirety twice, and I have read excerpts and sections of the books, as well as a large amount of research that I've done for this video. So if I am to make a mistake, it's far more likely to be in the Game of Thrones section. But with all that in mind, I will be giving my opinion at the end of the video, but until then, I will try to remain as unbiased and neutral as possible, and just give you the facts, as they're presented in the lore. Section 1. How do they compare to real steel? So for starters, let us establish a baseline for comparison. Since these are fictional metals, we should compare them to real metals. Obviously, the most logical comparison would be to high carbon steel, which we do know quite a bit about. I find the best way to measure the strength of a material for a bladed weapon is in tensile strength. And for those of you who may not know what that is, the term tensile refers to the amount of tensile or stretching stress a material can withstand before breaking or failing. Tensile strength is an important measure of a material's ability to perform in an application, and the measurement is widely used when describing the properties of metals and alloys. High carbon steel, which is what swords would be constructed primarily out of in the real world, has a tensile strength of 800 to 1000 megapascals. That's approximately 116,000 to 145,000 pounds per square inch of pressure resistance. Just as a reference, the strongest bone in the human body is the femur, and the femur can withstand up to 1,700 pounds per square inch to cleanly break. So, high carbon steel swords are approximately 68 to 85 times stronger than a healthy human femur. Now that we know how strong real-life high carbon steel swords are, let's compare them to their fantasy counterparts. Section 2. High carbon steel versus Valyrian steel. Here we actually have a relatively solid comparison to be made between modern high carbon steel and Valyrian steel, in the form of Damascus steel, which Valyrian steel is almost undoubtedly based on. The rippling appearance in modern Damascus steel is caused by using a combination of extremely high heat and specific additives, namely manganese, during the forging process to evoke more durable and powerful steel. Perhaps George R.R. Martin had such a keen sense of the abilities of a medieval culture that he was able to work a modern yet feasible material into his masterwork in the form of a rare and powerful substance. Now, in just a real-life comparison when comparing carbon steel and Damascus, there are many differences outside of appearance. Carbon steel, due to its hardness, for example, is far more likely to crack or break than to bend. And due to the layering of different metals in Damascus steel, the opposite is true. Both hold an edge well, but high carbon steel will likely hold one longer. High carbon blades generally lack chromium, which means that they are subject to rust, and Damascus blades are often softer, which means that over time they will wear down faster than traditional high carbon blades. So clearly, in real life, some may say the metals are a horse apiece, and depend on personal preference. But how does all this translate into the lore of Game of Thrones? Well, for starters, if we look at the lore, we are given a few pretty clear answers. For example, it is stronger and lighter than any other steel in Westeros and beyond, and that it will never dull, which means that the user will never need to sharpen it. And if the edge is that strong and resilient, it can therefore be assumed that a strong enough blow will likely cleave through any inferior metal, just based on the laws of physics as we know them. Just so you know what I mean, I am reasoning that since it has been stated that the blade never needs to be sharpened, that must mean that it is either that the metal is so hard and strong that it cannot be dented or chipped, or that there are magical properties that protect it. So conservatively, it would make Valyrian steel versus castle-forged steel comparable to real-life high-carbon steel swords versus an early Iron Age low-grade iron sword. And this is how we can get a baseline comparison from Valyrian steel to real-life high-carbon steel. Early forged iron swords had an average tensile strength of about 400 megapascals, making them about half as strong as carbon steel swords. So, for a quantifiable strength to Valyrian steel, here it is. If carbon steel is twice as strong as forged iron, and Valyrian steel is twice as strong as castle forged steel, which I am working under the assumption is comparable to carbon steel, then a Valyrian steel sword would have a tensile strength of about 1600 to 2000 megapascals, or about 232,000 to 290,000 pounds per square inch of force resistance, making it approximately 136 to 170 times stronger than a human femur. So that is how strong Valyrian steel is. Now let's take a look at Elven steel. Section 3. Elven steel versus high carbon steel. So this one is a bit tougher, since they approach metal very different in the Tolkien universe. For one thing, it is less about the material and more about the person forging it. For example, if you gave an identical ingot of steel to 3 smiths in Lord of the Rings, 1 human, 1 elf, and 1 dwarf, and told them all to forge an arming sword, you would get 3 very different weapons. To compare them to cars, for example, the human would forge a sword comparable to a Ford Fusion. A good, reliable, if unimpressive car that will get you from point A to point B and serve you well as long as you take good care of it. The dwarf would forge you a sword that would be comparable to a Lincoln Navigator. This thing would be well made, high quality, and in many cases luxurious, but also at times unwieldy and large. The elf would return to you a sword that is comparable to a Lamborghini. It would be slim, powerful, beautiful to behold, and unmatched in quality. The differences are all in the techniques and in many cases, the different magic used in forging the weapon in question. So since we are focusing on Andúril, first I should quickly outline what it is. Andúril, otherwise known as the Flame of the West, is the ancestral greatsword of the Kings of Gondor, descendants of the Númenóreans, who were an ancient and advanced race. The sword was originally called Narsil. It was originally forged by a legendary dwarven smith, and last belonged to Isildur, who used it to cut the one ring from the hand of one of the most powerful beings to ever exist in the world. The blade was broken by Sauron, in the same battle where the ring was cut from his hand. It shouldn't be understated that the person who broke this sword was in no way comparable to any mortal creature. He had, in many senses, godlike strength and powerful magic at his disposal, without which the destruction of the blade would not have been possible. The blade was then later reforged for Aragorn and given the new name of Andúril, or Flame of the West, which came from the bright red glow that came from the blade. It is important to note that like most elvish blades in Lord of the Rings, this one was enchanted to be far beyond the normal limits of steel, and Andúril in particular was stated to be unbreakable, even by Sauron. So it is established here that the sword is unbreakable, period. For another piece of information that I will be able to use to quantify the strength of this sword, it is stated in the Legendarium that Narsil was forged by the smith Telkar, and was forged in the same way and comparable to another blade known as Angrist, which was used to cut a Silmaril from the Iron Crown of Morgoth. While this may not seem all that impressive at first glance, it is important to think about that sentence. It was not hacked from the crown, or pried out, or chopped through. The man wielding the knife quietly, while Morgoth was sleeping, cut through his iron crown with a knife, without waking Morgoth and releasing the Silmaril. This is the strength of Elven steel in Lord of the Rings. So like before, we are going to compare the fictional material to real-life material for a strength comparison. Now, I know of very few metals that a carbon steel blade could cut through with the level of ease implied in that passage. For me, only one makes sense, and that is lead, which has a tensile strength of only 12 to 17 megapascals, or 1700 to 2400 pounds per square inch. As we know, and we saw before, high carbon steel has a tensile strength of right around the 800 megapascals, or 116,000 pounds per square inch mark, making carbon steel about 50 times stronger than lead. So if we use that equation to compare iron, which is what the crown was made out of, and which we know has a tensile strength of approximately 400 megapascals, we know that Elvish steel is approximately 50 times stronger than iron, giving it a tensile strength of about 20,000 megapascals, or 2,900,000 pounds per square inch. Wow, that got out of hand real quick. Quite the drastic difference. So it's conclusion time. Before I get started on that, however, I will say, really quick, I understand this system isn't perfect, and that it may be flawed. However, when comparing two fictional magical metals from different universes using the rules of those universes, it's kind of like trying to find the conversion ratio of unicorns to leprechauns. However, I only used in-universe sources, and then compared them to real-life materials and measurements to make quantifying them easier. I also understand that a pure tensile strength isn't enough to determine everything you need to know about a weapon, but it is widely comparable, so that's why I chose it. In the end, my findings have indicated that based on the information in the canon lore for both, Valyrian Steel has a tensile strength of about 2,000 megapascals, making it slightly more than twice as strong as real-life high-carbon steel, which is extremely impressive, and would make the sword an extraordinary weapon and make it understandable why they would be so sought after. However, using similar calculations based on in-source material, Elven steel weapons have a tensile strength of about 20,000 megapascals, making it 10 times as strong as Valyrian steel or 25 times stronger than real-life high-carbon steel. So in the end, the winner is Elven Steel from Lord of the Rings, and more specifically, Andúril over Longclaw. So as far as my opinion goes, I had hypothesized before starting the research for this video that Elven Steel would be stronger, just based on the emphasis of its strength, durability, and magical qualities in the books. However, I did not expect it to be that drastic of a difference. But I guess in high fantasy sources like this, I guess one shouldn't be surprised when magic makes the impossible possible. Even if we were to discount the story about the Silmaril being cut from Morgoth's crown, there are many other examples of elven weapons cutting straight through other swords, shields, and even armored opponents with ease. So they were truly magical weapons, whereas Valyrian Steel is just meant to be a superior material created by an advanced civilization. Well, that's the quantifiable results of an age-old question of which weapons are stronger, and I gave my personal takeaway. Now I'm curious, what do you think? Are the results what you expected? Do you disagree? What is your favorite weapon from either world? Let me know in the comment section down below. Congratulations on making it to the end of the video. If you did, I can assume you liked the content, and hopefully you'll subscribe and turn on the notification bell. If you haven't already, check out these links I have on the screen to see me on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. If you like my content and would like to support what I do here, there's a link to my Patreon account in the description, and a donation would be much appreciated. In any case, thanks for watching and have a nice day.